Just stop sharing here. Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Participants are getting into the call, so let's just wait a bit more. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll start in a few seconds. Let's just wait a bit more until everyone connects. People are getting to our connection. That's wonderful. Okay. All right. Well, I think we can start. Welcome to an exclusive webinar for members of the Cambridge Biosite program. My name is Sergio Varela. I'm a product marketing manager at Cambridge, Brazil, here in São Paulo. And I'm one of the people here responsible for the Cambridge Biosite program. Our objective with this program is to offer you structured support, and especially in terms of teacher development, which is so important, right? So before I talk about the webinar today, let's talk about what's coming next. We are having a special price campaign for these teacher development books in December, January, and February. So if you wish, you'll be able to buy them with a 50% discount voucher, which is pretty good, right? This is only for members of the program, so stay tuned. You get more information via email when this is ready, but we are beginning in December already, okay? Now, we have two other webinars scheduled, one for January and one for February. In January, we are having a special webinar with our consultant, Alcione Tavares. It's going to be in Portuguese. It's an idea to create more business for you. So how to create mini courses using our digital solutions, especially our employability skills module. So this is very interesting. You can definitely make more money next year if you can create these mini courses. So stay tuned for that. And in February, we have another webinar, this time with Dalton Morato from ABDR. It's also going to be in Portuguese, and you'll be able to learn more a bit about copyright and how to protect yourself against the use of illegal copies. Okay? Well, and today we have the pleasure to have Colin Ward from the United States with us. Colin has been teaching ESO for over 20 years now and has been an ELT materials writer for more than 15 years, publishing print and online materials for several publishers, including Cambridge University Press and Assessment. He received his MA in TESOL from the University of London and is currently a successful ELT a professor of ESOL at Lone Star College, North Harris in Houston, Texas, United States. Colin also co-creates a successful ELT blog called englishendeavors.org. So again, englishendeavors.org, where he shares classroom and research-informed lessons, activities, and strategies with the ELT community. So you'll be able to interact with Colin using the chat box, but please leave the Q&A box for specific questions to Colin to be answered at the end, okay? There's a certification for this webinar, in case you want. At the end, we'll put a link in the chat box to a digital form, and you just need to fill up the form and you'll be able to download your certificate. Okay, I think that's it. Well, welcome, Colin. It's a pleasure to have you here. So it's really over to you. Thank you.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. And I'd like to thank you, one, for just spending an hour of your day with me on a Friday afternoon. I know I'm a teacher myself, and I know it can be very fatiguing on a Friday. But I appreciate you being here. I'm excited to be here. I do want to thank Cambridge and particularly Sergio for asking me back and to be part of by your side. I'm a really, really big believer in professional development, and I really do appreciate the efforts that Cambridge makes to provide these kinds of opportunities to teachers of English, but also just to connect us globally. I think, after COVID, we were all kind of in our own little boxes, and it was, communication kind of waned, and it's wonderful to now have more opportunities to be able to communicate more, whether it's online or face to face. So thank you, Sergio. I want to talk about what I'm calling grammar on the move. And so I'm basically going to be we're going to be looking at grammar in multiple ways and at multiple levels. And if you did read the abstract, there is a slight change that I've made because I think I had too much material. And so what I've decided to do is to focus much more on speaking and pragmatics in this presentation and less on writing and genre. So just wanted to give you a heads up. So I will talk about writing just a little bit at the beginning, but one of my bigger focuses now more is on speaking and listening. So the way that yes,
I'm sorry, Colin, are you sharing the presentation? Sorry, because I can see it.
say again.
Can you please share your presentation because it is not showing off?
Oh, you're not seeing it. Okay,
It's not showing it. No.
let me try again. But you heard my intro, yeah?
Oh yes, we did. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Let's try that one more time. I'm going to cross my fingers.
Yeah.
You got it?
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, now I feel like I have to show you my title screen again. Yeah. So, anyways, I'm going to talk about basically different levels of grammar. So this idea of grammar on the move, or this idea of the idea that language, it can be working in different ways, at different levels, different systems of grammar. So the way that I see grammar is that I see that it's more than just rules. So grammar is also about finding patterns. So these different systems. So based on my own research and my own practice, I divide grammar into 3 different kinds. And so the first kind is what I call traditional grammar. And so this is the grammar that we're all used to. So it's a lot of rules. It's a lot of micro rules. It can be very helpful for students, especially if they're really good at analyzing rules. But the caveat is a lot of time those rules are not connected to content or to vocabulary development. So that's traditional grammar. Lexical grammar is the next level up. So the theory of lexical grammar is that vocabulary and grammar are not separate entities. So they are interdependent and they are intertwined and they support one another. So this is the grammar of phrases and the grammar of clauses. And that's going to be a large part of what I focus on today in my presentation. And then finally, there's an even wider pattern of organization, and that is discourse grammar. So discourse grammar includes those phrases and clauses, but it's also about the moves that we make when we go beyond the sentence in writing or when we go beyond the utterance when speaking. So all of these are different systems of grammar, but they're operating at different levels. So we're going to start talking about traditional grammar. So traditional grammar has a long history. It's the grammar that's traditionally has been taught and learned, and it represents kind of that more compartmentalized nature of grammar found in like a typical grammar textbook, for example. So you might have a chapter about the simple past, you might have one about modals, you might have one about count and non-count nouns. So everything is kind of in a neat and tidy package, and it makes it more digestible, right? And that's actually the grammar I started teaching with. When I first started teaching 20 some years ago, I had to learn English grammar. You know, being a native speaker, I couldn't talk about English grammar. I didn't know what, I wouldn't even use the word helping verb. I wouldn't use the term modal, right? So that kind of grammar was quite helpful to me when I started teaching. And it's what I relied on at the beginning. And so this is just a quick illustration of what I mean by traditional grammar. It's like the grammar in the box, right? So if you've taught with a more traditional grammar book before, I'm sure a chart like this probably looks very familiar to you, or if you are even from your own studies. So this is like a chart on article usage, right? So when we use the for information already introduced and for second mentioned, again, it's very digestible. And so we're more likely to see this kind of grammar being used at beginner levels, not always. And there's pros and cons. So pros for me is that it can be easier to teach. It's broken down. It feels foundational, like you're giving students the foundation of grammar. But the cons are that it can feel decontextualized, and it can be very limited to what we call sentence level grammar. So if you think about the articles slide, there was an example sentence that said, "The weather's crazy." Well, it's great that we are using the for weather, right? Because we're referring to a common thing. But what was said before that? Like, what elicited that comment? Like, did somebody say, like, "I can't believe it's raining again," or "It's still raining"? Well, the weather's crazy lately, right? So it's not just sentence level. We do take it out of context because we can get to that kind of micro level. But if we limit it there, we're not giving students an opportunity to understand grammar at a higher level, if that makes sense. So Marian Celestia Murcia talks about the fact that she believes there's only 3 rules in English grammar that are context-free. So only 3 that you can effectively teach without any context, or more accurately, ones that you could just teach within the context of just a single sentence. So not tied to meaning. So for example, like reflexive pronouns. So Mary accidentally cut herself, or Max accidentally cut himself. We don't need context there. We just need to know, are we talking about female or male, right? Or do we say themselves? But if you teach a tense, you need context. If you're going to teach why we use a simple past, you've got to have more context than a single sentence. If you're going to teach articles, you're going to need to know the context of what was said before and what was said after in order to know whether to use a or the or nothing. So that's situation. That's looking across sentences and across utterances. So my disclaimer here is I don't think it's bad to teach rules. I teach rules. I just taught some rules on the conditional yesterday. But I also feel that we can also look outside the box a little bit more, especially when it comes to practice. So this quote comes from a book edited by Ellie Hinkle. The book is called Teaching Grammar to Speakers of Other Languages. I'd highly recommend it. It's very well written. It's a collection of chapters from various different experts in the field. And one message that comes out of it is that language learning is not just about grammar, but rather it's a system of communication, as opposed to a decontextualized set of rules that we just want students to memorize. And I'd argue, and she would argue, that true communication only occurs at the discourse level. However, I also don't think we can ignore grammar at the phrase level. So these are, again, those 3 levels that I'm talking about. So the first level, traditional grammar, discrete rules. The second level, construction grammar. This is what Ellie Hinkle refers to it as, construction grammar. I was calling it before lexical grammar. Basically the same idea, just 2 different terms. So this is the grammar of phrases and fixed expressions. So it's another great quote that I often use from Ellie Hinkle. And she talks about how these prefabricated constructions behave like individual units. And what does that mean? It means that we have specific ways of putting words together into phrases. So common expressions, proverbs, collocations. So things like, have a great day or better late than never. So the brain stores thousands of these phrases as actually as individual units. That is the theory in cognitive psychology. And Hinkle is more looking at language chunks in writing, and particularly academic writing. So if you're going to refer, for example, to like an external source of knowledge, you might use a chunk like it is believed that, or it's been noted that, and then you would slot in your idea. And this is because the brain is believed to be very, very efficient. The brain wants to find patterns, patterns in language, patterns in behavior. Because if it can find a pattern, it can be more efficient, which means it can save energy. So there's actually a biological side to all of this, which I think is really interesting. And some research actually estimates that as much as 70% of the language that we use is actually these fixed chunks of language. So I was looking at materials like passages and interchange and evolve, and I was just kind of doing some detective work. And, there's examples here of embedded grammar, right? You might embed an article into a phrase or an infinitive. So we have different kinds of fixed chunks of language, like expressions, like, to sleep like a log, right? To sleep really deeply. We also have non-cliche ones, like to feel drowsy. That's a chunk, right? A verb with an adjective. We have all these words that are collocating with town. You can call it a mountain town, a resort town, a suburban town, a college town. You can run into a problem. That's a great, great phrase. And in that phrase, run into a problem, you have an embedded preposition into and an embedded article. That's the discrete grammar that is embedded within that phrase, but we don't have to necessarily point students' attention to all of those micro rules. They can just learn it as a phrase. So the takeaway here is that the brain seems to be more naturally attracted to macro structures. And it suggests that using a macro approach in language teaching could be more efficient, but also more natural. And Hinkle stresses this in her research, that we don't have to attend to these micro rules. We can teach chunks to be more efficient. So for example, why do we say I have a decision to make? My students often say, most of my students are Spanish speakers, and they almost always say a decision to take, right? But why do we say a decision to make? Well, that's because for us, it just sounds right. So we teach it as a phrase. They can store it as a chunk, and then they can start slotting in other possibilities. So once they get a decision to make, once they get the feel of the pattern, they could say, I have a choice to make. I have a call to make. We have some plans to make. They're getting the sense of patterning, right? And then I don't need to do a whole lesson on what an infinitive is. And quite honestly, we don't see typical grammar books teaching beginning level students about infinitives. But I would certainly still introduce these phrases at a beginner level, because not only can they easily get the pattern, but they're really able to use these very common phrases in their speaking right away. They're very useful. So with macro grammar, we can provide scaffolding to encourage greater accuracy. So we can get students to input info into a semi-fixed phrase, and then we can get them used to these patterns and show them ways that words are attracted to each other. So here, my students we were focusing on this target vocabulary. I can't quite remember where it came from, but these were the words that they were learning. This is a higher level class. So words like visible, rush, criminalize, warning, shelter. And so what I did is, and I do this now anytime in a writing class that ties with vocabulary, I put those keywords into phrases. So criminalize is unfair to criminalize. So it is unfair to criminalize something. Put my belongings, right? They get the whole chunk and then they use it. sometimes I just created these chunks on my own. Other times I use this website called justtheword.com, which is a really fun website to play around with if you have the time. But in just the word, you can put in any word you want. So I could put in comply, one of these words, to comply. And it will give you all the most frequent words that collocate or go with that particular word. You can get huge lists. You can get example sentences. It's really fascinating. I've had my students use it as well, my students at more of a higher level. So it's called justtheword.com. Anyway, but what I've seen is when I give my students these chunks of language to use, these phrases, I get sentences like this. So these are my students' actual sentences. I love number 9. It's, the kite was flapping in the wind. I don't think I would ever have a student write that sentence if I didn't put flapping in with wind, right? But they're the ones that decided to put in the word kite. That's the image they wanted to make. And if you look at these sentences, you will see that there is very little to grade here. The chunk here is providing just enough scaffolding for them to create a complete idea, but also more accurately. So it's great for teachers. We can save time grading, but we also then don't have to focus so much on discrete level grammar. I saw somebody wanted, yeah, justtheword.com. That was the website. And these are great sentences. Yeah. He's in a rush, you know. You embed prepositions. You know, prepositions are one of the hardest things for people to acquire, right? But if I teach rush with in a, hopefully they're going to remember it's always in a rush, right? So we're seeing more and more phrases and collocations appear in textbooks now. We're seeing them more contextualized as well. Like I took these from Interchange, if you use Interchange. So we have wonderful phrases like check in for a flight, download apps, easy adopters, smart devices, right? So not only do we have chunks here, but they're also contextualized because we see they're related to technology, right? Um, we also see lists of single words that are not contextualized. We see that a lot when a book might present opposites or antonyms, right? So here students have to match the two antonyms, right? So accept and refuse, or marry and divorce. And I think that can be useful, but I would level it up and I would go one step further and I would make sure that they're using those words in phrases as well, right? So instead of just enjoy, I would give them the chunk enjoy going to. What's so nice about doing things like this is you're embedding grammar that can be more sophisticated than what your students are ready to learn. So enjoy is followed by a gerund, right? We don't say enjoy to go, we say enjoy going. And I'm embedding that gerund, they get a feel for the pattern, right? Same with spend time. We don't say spend time to with an infinitive, we say spend time going to, right? Again, we're embedding the grammar of a gerund. Another example here, if you look at 6 and 7, I lent my friend money $5 because versus borrow money from. My students always have a hard time understanding the difference between borrow and lend. They use borrow for everything, perhaps because in Spanish it's the same word. I'm not sure. I should find out. But if we can put them in this chunk, and for example, we were saying borrow from, right? And if you do lend, you can say lend to. I could have done it that way. Then students get the feel for the pattern, and hopefully then they'll remember it better and internalize it. So I've touched a little bit on writing, and now I want to focus the rest on speaking. So these are also chunks, okay? But it's not just about the words that are there. It's also, when we're speaking, about how we put the words together when we speak. So where are we using elision? Like, are we taking a vowel out of a word? Like we don't say camera, we say camera, right? Or is there some kind of assimilation going? Like when we say the word pancake, when we say it quickly, the N assimilates and we actually say it with an M. So we say Pam cake, right? And then there's linking, right? This is the grammar of speaking. So we have these phrases like a place to run, great, and you, right? And sometimes I say to my students when they're talking, that's not how we word that. And what does that mean? Well, that means one, we have specific ways of putting words together into phrases, but we also have a certain way of putting those words together orally and basically crunching them together so that we can speak more efficiently. And then it's also about context. So when do we use these formulated expressions, right? When do you say, for example, oh, you must be kidding, right? So that's the larger level. So there are many ways of using patterned and ritualistic language in speaking. So here's some examples. So which of these, for example, would you be more likely to use? And what would be the message behind it? So if we look at number one, you say, knowing that is good. And B, it's good to know, right? We're much more familiar with B. It's not that A is grammatically incorrect, it's completely fine, right? But that's just not the way we say it. These are patterns that we can need students to be introduced to, right? Same with number two, thank you, that's very kind of you. Much more common than thank you, you are good, right? So a student might think, why couldn't you say you are good? What if that's the way they say it in their own language? It certainly sounds correct, right? But they haven't been taught the pattern. So to summarize this section, our brains are pattern seeking. And the embedding of grammar into these patterns helps learners to store and to recall context appropriate language for specific purposes. This is of course true in writing, but it might be even more important in speaking, where these familiar chunks of language are allowing us to tap into a common meaning at the macro level, right? So let's look at meaning at a micro level. So here's a word, good, word we all know, word students learn very early in their learning. And so what do you know about this word? Well, you probably, being teachers of English, you probably know a lot about the word. On their own, words, even like good, tend to be neutral because they don't necessarily mean anything on their own. It's when we put them into phrases that they tell us about the speaker and they tell us about his or her context and intentions. For example, if you look at number 2 and number 4, so 4 is good luck with that, and 4 is good day, mate. Well, we know that those speakers are probably in a more informal situation, right? Number 2 is even could be a bit sarcastic. Good luck with that. In other words, I don't think it's going to happen, right? And compare that with number 5. Oh, it's good that might be in a more formal situation, a situation where we try to look at the bright side of something, or we might be prefacing a critique, right? But we want to start with something positive. So these are all things that you know from the words on the page, but they're not clear to students and they cannot be taught at the micro level. So micro level basically throws a lot of detailed oriented rules at students. At the same time, often, if you think about, sometimes a grammar book can have just a full page of rules. It can be useful when used the right way. I still use charts, right? But I've also seen that it can work against my students because it can be just simply too much for them at once because it's not contextualized. So macro grammar looks at grammar differently. It focuses on the bigger picture. It focuses on things like lexical chunks. In writing, it focuses on genre. In speaking, it focuses on pragmatics and on moves that we make in discourse when we're speaking. And if by providing students with more scaffolding, by embedding those rules into phrases and teaching chunks that relate to a specific task, I'm hoping we can get students to attend more to the meaning behind a phrase rather than just the grammar of the phrase. So regarding this idea of attending to context and to audience and to purpose, this is the highest level of grammar, what I call discourse level grammar. So this is conversational grammar. This is more than just one utterance. It's an utterance in the context of others. And this is where we see multiple grammatical structures working at the same time. So let's look at the student's introduction to a conversation. So she says, "Hi, Jane. Say, are you okay? You're looking a little bit tired." So what kind of conversation is she initiating? "You're looking a little bit tired." She's showing empathy and she's opening a conversation. And here's the rest of the conversation. So Jane's like, "Oh, I am. It's my neighbors," right? So she's introducing a problem, and it sounds like a problem they've already shared, right? Because then we say, "Oh, so they're acting up again, huh?" It's acknowledging this difficult situation and asking for more information, huh? Right? And then, yeah, they're kind of driving me up the wall. I'm not talking about my own neighbors. I got this from Passages dialogue. But this is grammar on another level. These are moves across utterances, and this is what I mean by discourse grammar. If we actually took these utterances and looked at it at grammar rules, it would look a bit like this. This is what it looked like broken down into the micro level. For our students to actually be able to communicate, they're going to be bringing in other knowledge to bear, however. They're going to be bringing in context, purpose, intended meanings, appropriate language choices for interacting with a peer in this instance. So at this point, how useful is it to break grammar down into these discrete units when we're looking at a larger piece of discourse? In terms of sounds, it's really hard to discriminate words uh, when you're a language learner. So what does like looking a bit mean? Looking a bit. It means you're looking a bit tired, right? What is up again? So they're acting up again, right? But I would never teach just up again, right? But that's a chunk. I would teach it in the context of pronunciation, right? But as a word, it doesn't exist as a word. Yeah. So obviously, speaking and writing are two different things. It's almost like two different languages because of this linking, because of this assimilation, because of this elision, right? But if we start to see more opportunities for focusing on these skills of linking and elision and assimilation, then we might be able to better prepare our students for being successful when speaking. These are examples of what are called discourse markers. So O is a discourse marker. What's interesting is a lot of times we don't see these in books, especially in grammar books, because like, what does O mean? It can mean so many different things the way we say it, right? So if I say like, "Oh," that means like, "Oh, wow, I'm surprised," or, "Oh, it's like I'm down," or, "Oh," it's like I'm sorry, or I'm feeling sorry for somebody, or, "Oh," like, "Yeah, I got it. I understand," right? Textbooks can't teach this, but we can as teachers through our modeling. We have some O's in this conversation. "Oh, I am. It's my neighbors." That O is more I'm feeling down. It's not like, "Oh, I am," right? She's not showing understanding, right? But the other one, "Oh, so they're acting up again." Well, that is showing acknowledgement and understanding. "Oh," right? The voice goes up, right? This is what I'm getting into with my students. So we have wonderful scripts and textbooks. They give us words, they give us chunks, but it's hard for them to give us the feelings behind the words. So how can we add to them? How can we get more feeling in there? So I'm going to show you some things that I have done. This is a very, very simple way to do it. One way is simply by adding an emotional cue before an utterance in a dialogue. And so here's some examples, right? So we have Daniel and his friend. So Daniel's feeling frustrated. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I can't. I wish I could, but I'm working on my paper today." He's frustrated, right? And then his friend is insistent. "Come on, you can work on your paper later," right? So it's getting emotion behind the utterance. When I ask students to come and speak up in front of the classroom without giving them any kind of cue, I'm going to get more like, "Oh, sorry, Daniel, I can't. I wish I could, but I'm working on my paper today. Come on," or "Come on." They might do some linking, but they're not feeling it. So one pronunciation point that I think is really hard to teach is the intonation of sarcasm. So I have British parents, so I can be kind of dry and sometimes sarcastic at times, and a lot of times my students aren't expecting it, or they just don't pick up on that kind of humor that I have. So they don't quite know how to take it. And they also need instruction, I think, on the intonation of sarcasm. Because if you're not understanding that somebody's being sarcastic and they're being serious, I mean, you know that that can cause a serious breakdown in communication. So this past summer, I taught a drama course for ESL students, and students were using scripts, and they were assigned roles within a script to assume a character and their feelings. On a side, I'm going to say it is such a great way to teach pragmatics and pronunciation. I'm going to plug my friend Alice Savage. She has a wonderful book called The Drama Book, which is a great resource if you just want to start putting in a little bit more pragmatics into your classroom. And what she's done is she's actually written like specific dialogues specifically for an ESOL context where they're working on pragmatics and pronunciation. Anyway, it's called The Drama Book if you're interested. So in this case, I wanted to teach sarcasm, and I wanted to teach the intonation of tag questions. So is the tag question asking for confirmation, or is the tag question being sarcastic, depending on where it's said? So number one, if I say, well, that's really helpful, isn't it? Definitely sarcastic. Number two, I didn't say that, did I? I didn't say that, did I? Versus, I didn't say that, did I? Right? You could be confirming, did I? Or you could be sarcastic, did I? Right? With sarcasm, it goes down at the end, right? With confirmation, the intonation is up. We can't just leave, can we? Right? You're asking. We can't just leave, can we? Right? That's sarcasm. So a little passive aggressive, maybe. So this is something I've been practicing with my students, and we practice it many times. I might say them, and I'm having them decide, right, what I'm saying. I might switch them up and do it again just so they keep hearing it. They need to keep hearing it and hearing it and hearing it. If we want to focus on a discourse level, you can set a context. And this is also kind of what I was getting from the drama book that I was talking about. So you can set a scene, use a scene, and make a scene that's a bit more emotional and a little bit less informational. So here I have Heiko and Simona, married couple. So Heiko bought a used camera. He's a photographer, 300 bucks. And Simona thinks, well, it's kind of a waste of money. So I'm giving him a situation. I'm giving them roles, Simona or Heiko. I'm setting their intentions, and I'm setting their emotions. So Simona, you're angry. You're going to use an angry tone and a sarcastic tone. And Heiko, you're really happy about your camera. So you're going to use a more optimistic tone when you speak. If I can set this from the beginning before they start to practice the dialogue, I'm going to hear better pragmatics. I'm going to hear more emotion. And a lot of times I'm going to be hearing much better intonation and stress. So this is at the discourse level. So we're seeing grammar here at a macro level, not worrying about all the little micro rules, right? They're feeling the patterns. They will internalize them. And they don't need to attend to the micro rules. So for example, here we got the script, right? So I can't believe you wasted your money on that thing. It doesn't even work, does it? There's that intonation, right? Going down, right? Being a little snarky, a little sarcastic, right? At the end, Heiko's like, when's it going to be? Not at all. I have next week off, don't I? I'll do it then. That's when I'll work on it, right? He's optimistic, right? So he's kind of asking himself, like confirming. He's not being sarcastic. So you're seeing these tag questions again, right? So we want to elicit that in scripts, in what they're doing for us and performing for us in classroom. So listening is a great way for students to be more attuned to pragmatics, right, and the emotion behind their utterances. So this is another simple activity that I've used in my classroom where I read these sentences with a certain emotion using different intonation and changing my intonation according to the goal. So in number one, I say, It's not the end of the world. That would be sarcastic, right? If I said, oh, don't worry, it's not the end of the world, trying to be comforting. And two, I'd love to go. Yeah, I'd love to go. I'd put the emphasis on love. I want to go. I'm excited. Three, you could say it either way, right? Annoyed or relieved, like, see you soon, or okay, see you soon, right? This requires you as a teacher. It's not going to come off the page. And then have them practice. So I'll put them into pairs. I'm going to have partner A say each statement. So it's not the end of the world. They're going to try and say it either in a comforting way or in a sarcastic way. And then their partner is going to listen to them talk and say, okay, I think you're being sarcastic, or you're being comforting, or you're excited, or you're relieved, right? And if the answer is no, then there's something that needs to happen there. Either the delivery needs to change, so you can focus on helping the student who's delivering the utterance with their stress or their intonation, or the breakdown is perhaps on the listener side, who doesn't know what the intonation of sarcasm is, right? Or how we show that we're approving of something versus being jealous of something. So the idea is we want to take scripts a bit further. You know, we're given wonderful phrases and expressions in textbooks now, but students need our help with the correct pitch and the correct intonation to express their feelings. So here, for example, we have expressions that we're showing congratulations and sympathy. If you use Evolve, they have a whole section on just functional language like this. But these things are meant to be said out loud, and they're intended to have a message. And that message really comes both from the words that are being used, but also the way that we are expressing those words, right? So if we're showing encouragement, we'd say, that's great news, or you did really well, right? If we're showing empathy, our intonation changes. I'm so sorry. We go down, right? So that's where we step in. This is another simple activity. I also took this, I think I took this from the drama book as well, from Alice. And I was having students doing one of her plays, and they were using scripts, and they were assuming the character in a role, which means they were assuming that character's intentions and their personality, right? And so because we were working on pragmatics, I really wanted to help my students think about, how do you project the emotion of the exact same sentence, right? But with a different word stress. And this was in there. And so we could say this simple phrase, I want to go, in three completely different ways, depending on what we want to emphasize. And depending on what we stress, it will relay a completely different message, right? So this is exactly what I did with my students. I'm going to show you what I did with them. So I gave them part of a conversation, and I asked them, how would you respond? So if somebody says, well, if you don't really want to come with us, that's fine. So which would be the correct response? So it'd be like, I want to go, right? You're like assuming I don't want, but I do. I want to go, right? I'm just going to head to the store. I'll see you in a few. Well, I want to go. Right? So the focus there is on the subject, on I, because I want to be included, right? You don't look too happy. You're not enjoying the party? I want to go, right? If you're not enjoying the party, you want to focus on the fact that you want to leave and not stay. Depending on what word we're stressing, it projects a different meaning, right? And that's what I'm getting at. That's going beyond the utterance. That's looking at a more macro or a more global scale. So as a teacher, it's all about awareness raising. We don't just look at the words on the page. They look static on the page. So how can you give them life? How are those words and phrases delivered emotionally? Adrian Underhill has a great quote here. It's neurologically impossible to remember a thing for which one has no emotion. In other words, we can't internalize and remember things, including grammar rules, that lack emotion. If students are reciting dialogues without emotion, they're less likely to internalize the grammar that they're learning, including even the grammar at the phrase level. And so this is pragmatics. This is the macro level of grammar. It's very much related to discourse grammar, right? And so pragmatics is where I say something like, well, I'm so glad we ran into each other. And you pick up on that message that, okay, I'm so glad we ran into each other. It sounds like they might want to go. Right? It's a message that it's time for it to end. It was so good to see you, right? That means I have something else to do, right? It's a polite way of ending the conversation. That's an example of what's called a speech act. So these are intended, there are intended meanings, there are intended assumptions and purposes behind what we choose to say. This is from Ishihara and Cohen, Teaching and Learning Pragmatics, wonderful book. Would highly recommend that as well. So speech acts are what we also call functional language, right? So if you use Evolve, for example, those functional language sections, those are speech acts. So apologizing, inviting somebody to do something, asking for a favor, encouraging somebody to do something. If you want to read more about this, I would read Ishihara and Cohen's book. So this is pragmatic. So linguists have been studying this. And what's interesting is some have been trying to better understand the higher order level of pragmatics and trying to connect it to a more discrete micro level of grammar and trying to marry the different levels of grammar that I was speaking about earlier. So this comes from a study from Celsi, Murcia, and Yoshida. And they looked at 250 contextualized uses of the present perfect progressive. So we're basically detectives. And upon looking at all of these contextualized uses in conversation, they actually identified a three-move structure that naturally elicits the present perfect progressive. So there's this structure where the first move is you're providing some kind of background information, and we tend to use the simple present or the present perfect. And then the second move is a pivot or a shift, where you would highlight an ongoing activity of concern, and that elicits the progressive, present perfect progressive. And then the third move is like a follow-up or some kind of evaluation, and then we switch back to the simple present. So they talk about the fact that some constructions are pivotal in that they occur in the middle of a discourse segment, based on a prior situational context or prior discourse, as well as a follow-up discourse, if that makes sense. And so here is an example of that three-move structure. So why are you all sweaty? I've been cleaning up the garage. Oh, do you want some water? Right? I've been cleaning up the garage. Present perfect progressive. So there it is. It's been elicited. So we're seeing these grammatical constructions and why and when the present progressive naturally comes out. If you just teach that single utterance without any kind of context, I've been cleaning up the garage, doesn't really make much sense, right? We've got to have it within a larger discourse, even if it's in just a three-move discourse. Even that is enough. So compare this to teaching grammar at the sentence level only, or the utterance level, or in a box like we saw before. When I teach the present perfect and the progressive, I can't isolate it, right? When I do the present perfect progressive, I can't isolate it from the simple present or sometimes the present progressive. So it really makes me think about how I present my grammar. If things are too isolated and not within the context of discourse, then students are not going to understand how or why to use that structure. But we also have to raise their awareness of that larger level of discourse grammar. How do we do that? How can we get students to think about language at a larger level? It's through pragmatics and through awareness raising. One thing I do is I use listenings to diagnose students' ability just to recognize the context right from the beginning. So I want to establish the context, and I just ask some basic questions about the speakers and their relationships. So who is talking, right? How do you know? What is their relationship? Are they friends? Are they coworkers? Is there some kind of power dynamic? Is one a boss and one an employee? Is it a mother and a son? That relationship is going to affect their language choices and also affect the way they deliver their messages emotionally. So I would play this audio script, for example, from and with the books closed. I do not want the students reading. I want them hearing. I want to see what they hear and understand before they rely on the written script. Can they identify the speakers and their relationship? This is big picture. I'm not expecting them to have remembered any language at this point in time. I may play it once. I may need to play it twice. You might have them listen to it a second time for a different purpose, right? So just asking, well, where are they? Where is this conversation taking place? Or what will happen after this conversation? So you can ask, when you play it, you can ask for different aims each time that you play the audio. And then you can take the chance to model the conversation the way you think they would say it with some kind of emotion. Identify what it is. Is it, are they being friendly? Are they being aggressive? Pick a couple of the lines there and have students repeat so they can get a feeling for the pragmatics behind it. Like, good idea. What's the emotion behind that? Good idea. When they're saying, yeah, they're trying to make a restaurant plan, right? It's a very good restaurant near your hotel. Why don't we go there? Good idea, right? The intended message is like, let's do it, right? Again, what does good mean on its own? Nothing really. So pick some different lines, have students repeat, and have a quick conversation about what is the intended message and what is the intended feeling behind that message. You can also change it up. So when you're dealing with pragmatics, it can be really fun because you can dig a little bit deeper and really start looking at the moves that people make, right? So you can raise awareness of these moves. So what is it that Antonio necessarily wants? What is it that Jonathan wants? Where does this conversation change direction? Have them talk about this in groups and then go over it and then talk about how we say it. I think if they can understand these intentions more, I think they're going to be much better at delivering the language in a more natural way. So we see here, Jonathan is kind of reluctant. And so Antonio really wants to go out. Jonathan's like, sorry, got that report to finish. Antonio's like, how about just a quick bite? Right? He really wants to go. Jonathan's still reluctant. I'm not sure. I really got to get it done tonight. Then Antonio's like, well, how about we just go to the hotel restaurant then? My treat. That's a pivot there because what's happening is he's bargaining, right? My treat. I'll pay for it. John's like, I think I could do that. Okay, right? This is natural conversation. Um, all I did here is I took the original script from Evolve, which already provided me the context, and it recycled the functional language to suggest ideas like how about and let's, right? To offer suggestions. That was the focus in that particular lesson. And I've just added a little bit extra pragmatics. I added something a little bit more awkward. That I want my students to navigate. You know, how can you bargain in a conversation to get what you want? So these are speech acts that students are able to easily recognize and to learn if we raise their awareness of them. And it takes time, you know, they need to get used to the pattern of looking at larger level discourse like this and talking about the words that we're using, the phrases that we're using, the way we're changing our pronunciation to show a particular aim or purpose or feeling. There's so much we can do. And I really think, when I was really thinking like, what is my main focus here? What message do I really want to relay? Is that a gold mine you have are the audio scripts that accompany your textbook. You know, whether you're using passages or whether you're using interchange or evolve, take advantage of those. Look at them. What pragmatics can you introduce? What can you add? What moves can you focus on? Can you have two students come to the front of the class, and can you give them specific intentions? Like, you're going to be sympathetic, you're going to be reluctant, you're going to be pushy, and you're going to be reluctant. Can you bring up another pair and give them different emotions or different intentions or a different pragmatic aim? Like, one is sympathetic, right? Or one is angry. Does one want something that the other person has? There's so many ways that you can mix it up. But that's up to you to figure out what's best to do. So we can use these scripts for so many different teaching and learning opportunities, right? We can focus on chunks and fixed expressions. We can focus on conversational moves. We can focus on emotional cues. We can even use these scripts to focus on more discrete level grammar, right? But then see these rules in a contextualized way. And then we can change them up for whatever particular language or learning objective we want. So what I encourage you to do is what I've been doing, is to be a bit of a detective. Look at the scripts like the one here and play with it a bit. Make your own mini lesson about the intonation of sarcasm or sympathy, or the chunks that we use to negotiate with somebody and bargain with somebody, or the chunks that we use to give and accept compliments. And a lot of times the book will provide that for you. I just think you could add a +1 to that as well. When I started doing this, I should say, just kind of this, my final words is that my students really started to roll with it. They started to come out of their shell more when we were getting a bit more dramatic. There's more laughter. I found that there was more of a breakdown of the affective filter that sometimes makes them too nervous to speak, which I completely understand. It's hard to get that feeling of, I'm in a safe space and I can kind of make mistakes and I can sound funny, or I can say something that doesn't sound natural to me, even though I know it is. I was teaching my students the conditional, and I was teaching them how we contract, like I would have gone. And I said, you can say, I'd have gone, Ida. And to them, it sounded so strange to them, right? Because it's just, for one, they're thinking of the words on the page. They're thinking of the written word, right? But they needed that practice. That's what I added. They needed that practice on using that contraction, because that's what they're going to hear outside in the real world. So that was a lot. If you have any questions, now would be a great time to ask. And I just want to mention again, Ellie Hinkle. I've mentioned Ellie Hinkle. Teaching English Grammar to Speakers of Other Languages is a really great resource. Ishihara and Cohen as well, Teaching Pragmatics. The website I talked about was justtheword.com. If you're looking for collocations. So I just encourage you to kind of have fun with it, play around, do a mini lesson, and see where it takes you and where it takes your students. It can be really freeing, and I've just really enjoyed it. It's kind of added a new layer to my teaching, which has been really nice. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Colin. Let's see whether we have any questions for you in the question and answer box. No, not really, but does anyone have any questions for Colin? This is the moment. We have a few minutes. No, only many thank yous. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming. I know it's tough on a Friday, so.
Well, Colin, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you very, very much for such a nice presentation. And I hope to count on you more times for our program. I think your presentations are really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio.
So for you guys, so you stay tuned for emails that will be sent to all members of the Cambridge Biosite program about special price for teacher development books, our newsletters, and the next webinars. So I think that's it. Thanks, folks, and thanks a lot, and see you next time. Have a wonderful weekend. Okay.
Take care.
Take care. See you. Bye-bye then.